I'm Saul, 35 years old, and last month, my father called me a lowlife and kicked me out of my childhood home. The irony: my computer hobby built a $47 million tech company that secretly paid for his heart surgery. For years, I supported my family from the shadows, hoping they'd eventually see my worth beyond diplomas. I never expected that family dinner to end with me walking away disowned and broken. But what happened 3 weeks later changed everything. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from? Hit that like button if your family ever misunderstood your path in life, and subscribe to join our community of unconventional success stories. I grew up in a modest brick house in Westlake, Ohio, where ambition was measured by degrees on the wall. My father Walter taught high school mathematics for 30 years, believing firmly that formal education was the only path to respectability. Mom Helen worked as a nurse at the local hospital, gentle, but always deferring to Dad's stronger personality. Then, there was my sister Jessica, 4 years older, and the golden child who checked every box on my father's success checklist. Our house operated on a simple premise: academic achievement equals worth. Jessica excelled, bringing home straight A's that earned prime real estate on the refrigerator door. I still remember how my father's eyes would light up at parent-teacher conferences for Jessica. "That's my daughter," he'd say, chest puffed with pride. By 16, she had already mapped out her path to medical school. Meanwhile, I found myself drawn to computers when I was 14 after Uncle Roy gifted me his outdated Gateway desktop. While other kids played video games, I took that machine apart within a week, figuring out every component before reassembling it. When I got it working again, better than before, I felt a rush that no school assignment had ever given me. "Stop wasting time on that thing," my father would say, knocking on my bedroom door. "Your math homework isn't going to do itself." What my father never understood was that I was teaching myself binary code while he thought I was playing Minesweeper. I wasn't rebelling. I was learning, just not in the way he recognized. School became increasingly frustrating. I'd sit in classes, my mind racing with ideas for programs I wanted to build, while teachers droned on about subjects that felt irrelevant. My grades weren't terrible, but they weren't Jessica level either. Things got worse in 10th grade when I was diagnosed with dyslexia after a particularly observant English teacher noticed my reading patterns. "This explains a lot," the specialist told my parents. "Saul is actually quite bright." Instead of understanding, my father saw it as another excuse. "Plenty of people overcome learning challenges. You're just not trying hard enough," he'd say, during dinner while my mother served pot roast and avoided eye contact. By junior year, I had started my first money-making venture, fixing computers for neighbors. Word spread quickly that the Cooper kid could fix almost any computer issue for $20, significantly less than the $60 minimum at Best Buy. Soon I was making $300 a week, stashing most of it in a coffee can in my closet. I expanded into building basic websites for local businesses. Mrs. Harrington's flower shop was my first client, paying me $150 for a simple site with contact information and photos. Soon, I was creating sites for the local hardware store, a dentist's office, and even the public library. My father dismissed it all. Hobby money, he'd call it, not a career. The defining moment came during my senior year, when acceptance letters arrived. I'd applied to state schools to appease my parents, but my heart wasn't in it. I'd already been learning more relevant skills on my own than any computer science program offered. Plus, I had nearly $20,000 in potential startup capital saved. The argument erupted on a Thursday evening in May. "What do you mean you're not going to college?" my father shouted, his face reddening, as he slammed his palm on our kitchen table. "We didn't raise a dropout." "I'm not dropping out. I'm choosing a different path," I tried to explain. "The business is already making money. And business? You call fixing Mrs. Harrington's email a business?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jessica will be finishing medical school while you're still playing with motherboards in our basement." My mother, ever the peacekeeper, placed her hand on his arm. "Walter, maybe we should listen." "No, Helen. Not another word." His voice lowered to that dangerous quiet I'd grown to fear. "No son of mine is skipping college. Period." That night I made my decision. The day after graduation, I packed 2 suitcases, withdrew my savings $2,400, and caught a Greyhound to Chicago. I left a note saying I needed to find my own way. "I'll prove you wrong," I whispered to myself as the bus pulled away from the station. "I'll become someone even you can't dismiss." Chicago was overwhelming at first, a world away from suburban Ohio. I found a tiny apartment in Uptown with 2 roommates, Craig and Damon, both aspiring musicians, who didn't care that I worked odd hours hunched over a computer. My room was barely large enough for a twin mattress and desk, but it was mine, free from my father's disapproving glare. Those first months tested my resolve. I stretched my savings by eating ramen and working part-time at an electronics store while building my client base at night. Sometimes, when the heating failed in our apartment, or when I had to choose between buying new coding books or groceries, I questioned my decision. But every time doubts crept in, I remembered my father's dismissive laugh and pushed harder. My real break came 6 months after arriving in Chicago. I landed a job at Technova, a small startup developing inventory management software. The founder, Rick Lawson, took a chance on me despite my lack of formal education after I fixed a critical server issue during my interview. "Degrees tell me what you studied," Rick said. "What you just did shows me what you know." Technova became my real-world education. During day shifts, I absorbed everything: coding practices, business operations, client management. Rick became the mentor. I'd never had someone who valued solutions over credentials. "You've got good instincts, Saul," he'd say, reviewing my code. "Raw, but good." At night in my apartment, I worked on my own project. I'd noticed a gap in the market while helping Technova's clients. Small e-commerce businesses struggled with payment processing integration. The existing solutions were either too expensive or too complicated for mom-and-pop online stores. I called my solution Simple Swipe, a lightweight payment processing system designed specifically for small online retailers. I coded until sunrise many nights, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. The development costs drained my savings. When those ran out, I reluctantly turned to credit cards. Within 6 months, I had maxed out 3 cards to the tune of $32,000 in debt. My roommates thought I was crazy. "Man, you're going to bankruptcy court before you're 25. Craig warned, watching me count pennies for laundry while paying for premium cloud hosting. The lowest point came in the dead of winter. My heating bill was overdue. One of my credit cards had been declined at the grocery store, and SimpleSwipe had a critical bug I couldn't solve. That night, with the temperature in my room dropping below 50 degrees, I wore 3 sweaters and seriously contemplated calling my father to admit defeat. Instead, I called Rick and asked for advice on the bug. We spent 4 hours on the phone, and by morning SimpleSwipe was functioning again. 2 weeks later, I landed my first client, a vintage clothing store, willing to take a chance on my untested system. When the owner called to say their online sales had increased by 30% in the first month, thanks to the smoother checkout process, I knew I was onto something. I reduced my hours at Technova to focus more on SimpleSwipe, living on even less to invest more in my company. By the end of that first year, I had 10 clients and was barely breaking even, but the foundation was laid. I rented a tiny office space in a rundown building, and hired my first employee, a college dropout like me named Allison, who had an uncanny talent for user interface design. The business grew steadily. 10 clients became 50, then 100. I added features based on client feedback, building a reputation for responsive service that the bigger payment processors couldn't match. By year 2, I had 5 employees and was finally paying myself a modest salary. I never lost sight of home, though. When I received my first significant profit distribution, I anonymously paid off my parents' car loan. Later, when their roof needed replacing, I arranged for a contractor to do the work, billing it to a school alumni fund. I monitored their finances through casual conversations with my mother during our infrequent calls. "Things are tight this month," she'd mention. Days later, an unexpected refund would appear in their account, or a billing error would be mysteriously corrected in their favor. My father remained unimpressed with my vague descriptions of my computer work. During holiday phone calls, he'd inevitably ask when I was going back to school. Jessica just made partner at her medical practice, he announced during one Thanksgiving call. Imagine where you could be if you'd applied yourself like she did. What he didn't know was that my computer work had grown into a company valued at $5 million with 30 employees. Or that I had just purchased my first apartment in downtown Chicago, a sleek one-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd conquered. I met Tracy at a tech conference in my 4th year of business. She was a marketing consultant, presenting a session on customer acquisition, smart-driven, and refreshingly direct. When she critiqued an aspect of my company's website during her presentation, I approached her afterward to hear more. "Your product is excellent, but your messaging is all wrong," she said over coffee. "You're hiding your best features." That coffee meeting turned into dinner, which turned into breakfast. Tracy became not just my romantic partner, but a valuable business advisor who pushed me to think bigger. She was the first person who truly understood both my ambition and the complicated feelings I had toward my family. "Why don't you just tell them?" she'd ask, curled beside me in bed. "You've built something incredible." They wouldn't understand, I'd respond. To my father, success without a degree isn't real success. With Tracy's marketing expertise, Simple Swipe expanded internationally. We rebranded to PayClear and secured partnerships with major e-commerce platforms. Our customer base exploded, and suddenly we were processing millions of dollars in transactions daily. 6 years after leaving home, my company was valued at $47 million. I owned a penthouse in Chicago, had a brilliant and beautiful partner, and led a team of 120 people. By any objective measure, I had succeeded. Yet I still couldn't bring myself to tell my family the full truth. Instead, I bought a beachfront property in Sarasota, Florida, my private sanctuary, away from both business pressures and family expectations. It was there, watching the Gulf sunset one evening, that I made the decision to finally come clean with my family. "I'm tired of hiding," I told Tracy over the phone. "I'm going to visit next month and tell them everything." "It's about time," she said. "Just prepare yourself for any reaction." Little did I know how necessary that preparation would be. 3 weeks before my planned visit home, I received a troubling call from my mother. "Your sister's in a difficult position," she said, her voice tight with worry. "The medical practice is struggling financially. They might have to let go of some staff." I knew Jessica had invested heavily in expanding her pediatric practice, taking on significant debt to build a state-of-the-art facility. The prospect of her dream collapsing hit me hard despite our distant relationship. Without revealing my identity, I established the Future Healers Scholarship Fund that would cover the full private school tuition for both her children. Additionally, I arranged for an anonymous business consultant to help restructure the practice's finances. The consultant was actually my company's CFO, who identified several areas where Jessica could cut costs without sacrificing quality of care. "It's like a miracle," my mother reported in our next call. "Someone established a scholarship for the kids, and this amazing consultant showed up offering pro bono work for physician-owned practices." I smiled into the phone. "That's great, Mom. Jessica deserves some good luck." But my family's financial challenges weren't over. 2 months later, my father began experiencing chest pains. The diagnosis was severe. He needed triple bypass surgery, with several complications that made his case high risk. The best cardiac surgeon in Ohio was out of network, and the additional costs would reach nearly $280,000. "We're looking into home equity loans," my mother explained, her voice breaking. "Your father's too proud to ask for help." That night, I made arrangements for all medical bills to be covered by the Educators' Health Crisis Fund, a foundation I created within hours specifically for this purpose. I also ensured my father would have access to rehabilitation services and home care during recovery. The surgery was successful, and my father recovered more quickly than expected thanks to the comprehensive care he received. My mother called me in tears after a hospital administrator informed them all costs had been covered. The foundation said, Walter's years of teaching made him the perfect candidate for assistance, she explained. Can you believe there are such generous people in the world? The irony was painful. My family was willing to believe in the kindness of strangers but couldn't see the potential in their own son. When Tracy visited me in Chicago the following weekend, she found me staring at old family photos. You've done incredible things for them, she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind, but they deserve to know it's you. What if they reject me anyway? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if even after learning about my success, they still think I took the wrong path? Then, that's their loss, Tracy said firmly. But you'll never know unless you try. This secret benefactor routine isn't sustainable, Saul. She was right. The emotional toll of being simultaneously invisible and indispensable to my family was becoming unbearable. My company was thriving, now valued at exactly $47 million after a recent investment round, and I had nothing left to prove professionally. It was time to go home and show my family who I'd become. I decided to make the revelation special. I reserved a private dining room at my parents' favorite restaurant in Westlake, planning to first treat them to dinner before explaining everything. I arranged for financial documents, company profiles, and photos of our offices to be organized in a sleek presentation folder. I even purchased modest but meaningful gifts, a Mont Blanc pen for my father, a sapphire necklace for my mother, and a first-edition medical text Jessica had once mentioned. The anticipation was consuming. For the first time since leaving home, I felt hopeful about my relationship with my family. Perhaps my father would finally see that there were many paths to success. Maybe Jessica would regard me as an equal at last. Don't set your expectations too high, Tracy cautioned during our goodbye at Chicago O'Hare. They've had years to form opinions about your choices. I kissed her goodbye. I know, but they're family. Once they understand what I've built, things will change. How naively optimistic I was. I arrived at my parents' house on a crisp autumn evening, carrying an expensive bottle of Bordeaux and a package of my mother's favorite chocolates from a boutique in Chicago. The modest house looked smaller than I remembered. The blue paint faded the porch swings slightly, askew all things I could easily fix if they'd let me. Dad opened the door, his face a complicated map of emotions, joy at seeing his son, but also the perpetual disappointment that had shadowed our relationship for years. His hair had thinned considerably, and the surgery had left him looking frailer than the commanding figure of my youth. You made it, he said, giving me an awkward half-hug before stepping aside. Mom was more demonstrative, rushing forward to embrace me fully. Saul, you look so well fed. Is someone taking good care of you in Chicago? I thought of Tracy and smiled. Something like that. Jessica arrived moments later with her husband Thomas and their 2 children. She greeted me with the practiced warmth of someone meeting a distant acquaintance. The tech guy finally joins us, she said, her smile, not quite reaching her eyes, still fixing computers. Something like that, I repeated, swallowing the urge to mention that her children's education was courtesy of this tech guy. Dinner was a choreographed affair of surface-level pleasantries and careful evasions. Dad talked about his retirement plans, Mom, about her garden club, Jessica, about her children's accomplishments. No one asked meaningful questions about my life beyond cursory inquiries about that computer job. I waited until dessert when the kids were occupied with their tablets in the living room. This was my moment. I have something important to share with you all. I began reaching for the leather portfolio beside my chair. My work in Chicago has gone well, better than well, actually. Finally thinking about going back to school, Dad interrupted, setting down his coffee cup with authority. It's never too late to get a proper education, son. I took a breath. Actually, I've built a very successful company. We process online payments for businesses around the world. Last year, our transaction volume exceeded $2 billion. There was a moment of silence as my words hung in the air. 2 billion, Mom repeated, confusion evident in her furrowed brow. That's the transaction volume money that flows through our systems, I clarified. My company itself was recently valued at $47 million. I'm the founder and CEO. Jessica laughed first, a short disbelieving sound. Come on, Saul, be serious. I am serious, I said, opening the portfolio to show them press clippings, financial statements, and photos of our headquarters. PayClear is my company. We have 120 employees across 3 countries. Dad barely glanced at the materials. What kind of game are you playing? You fix websites for small businesses. That's how I started, I acknowledged. But the company grew. We developed proprietary technology that... Enough, Dad cut me off, his voice sharp. If you've made this kind of money, which I frankly don't believe, where did it come from? What exactly are you involved in? The implication stung worse than outright disbelief. It's a legitimate business, Dad. We're even being courted by major financial institutions for acquisition. Mom looked bewildered as she scanned a Forbes article mentioning PayClear as a rising fintech star. If this is true, why haven't you told us? Why live in some apartment in Chicago when you could afford? Because I wanted to succeed on my own terms, I explained. And I do have a penthouse in Chicago and a beach house in Florida. Dad's expression darkened. So you've been lying to us for years, playing some kind of game. No game. I've actually been helping the family anonymously, I admitted, deciding to lay everything bare. The scholarship fund for Jessica's kids. That was me, the consultant who saved her practice, my CFO. Jessica's face drained of color. What are you talking about? And Dad, your surgery and specialists, the Educators' Health Crisis Fund, doesn't exist. I paid for everything. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees in an instant. You had no right, my father whispered, his voice trembling with rage. No right to interfere in our lives like that, making us objects of charity. Your charity. It wasn't charity, I insisted. It was family helping family. I was in a position to help, so I did. Dad stood up so quickly, his chair toppled backward. So you've been watching us struggle, playing God from Chicago, deciding when to swoop in and save the day, getting some sick satisfaction from your family needing handouts. Walter, Mom said softly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Calm down. Your heart. My heart is fine, he snapped. What's not fine is my son living a double life, apparently making millions from God knows what internet scheme. It's not a scheme, I interjected, my own anger rising. I built a legitimate business that helps thousands of small companies process payments securely. Everything I've earned, I earned through hard work and innovation. Without even a bachelor's degree, Jessica scoffed. Be realistic, Saul. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, none of them completed college, I countered. The tech world values results over credentials. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Don't you dare compare yourself to those men. They were geniuses. You were a C student who couldn't be bothered to apply yourself. The familiar criticism hit its mark with surgical precision. In that moment, I realized no amount of success would ever change how my father saw me. I would always be the disappointing son who took the wrong path. I think you should leave, Dad continued, his voice dangerously low. Take your money and your condescension elsewhere. We've managed just fine all these years without your secret handouts. Dad, I was only trying to help. Get out, you lowlife, he shouted, slamming his palm on the table. We don't need your money. God knows how you really earned it. Probably some internet scam targeting vulnerable people. We want nothing to do with it, or you. Mom sat, frozen tears streaming down her face. Jessica stared at her plate, saying nothing, her silence a tacit endorsement of my father's rage. I gathered my portfolio with shaking hands. I'm sorry you feel that way. The money was given with love, not condescension. Love. Dad's laugh was bitter. You don't even know the meaning of the word. A son who loved his family wouldn't have abandoned them, wouldn't have lied for years. There was nothing left to say. I placed the small gift boxes I'd brought on the sideboard and walked toward the door. Don't bother coming back, Dad called after me. We don't need your kind of help. I drove back to my hotel in a daze, the weight of rejection crushing my chest until breathing became difficult. The family dinner I'd imagined for years, the reconciliation, the acceptance had shattered into something unrecognizable. In my hotel room, I finally allowed myself to break down sobbing with the accumulated grief of years spent seeking approval that would never come. That night in the hotel, I called Tracy, my voice raw from crying. "It was a disaster," I managed to say, recounting the evening in painful detail. "Oh, Saul," she sighed. "I'm so sorry. But maybe they just need time to process. It was a lot of information at once." "You didn't see his face," I replied. "He looked at me like I was something filthy, like my success was something shameful." Tracy's advice was measured. Give them space. Go to Florida for a while. Let the dust settle before trying again. By morning, I'd made my decision. I emailed my executive team, announcing a remote work period, and boarded a flight to Sarasota. The beach house, a modern 5-bedroom property with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private stretch of shore, had always been my escape fantasy. Now it would be my sanctuary. The first days passed in a blur of long walks on the beach, sleepless nights, and unanswered calls from my mother that I couldn't bring myself to return. What would I say? How could I explain that I understood her silence at the dinner table, her failure to defend me? Tracy flew down for the weekend, bringing warmth to the empty house. She found me sitting on the deck, staring at the Gulf of Mexico as if it might offer answers. "You need to stop punishing yourself," she said, placing her hands on my shoulders. "You did nothing wrong." "Then why does it feel like I did?" I asked. "Why does succeeding on my own terms feel like failure?" She sat beside me, threading her fingers through mine. "Because you're measuring success by your father's yardstick, but his measurements are flawed, Saul. They always have been." During Tracy's visit, we walked for miles along the shore, collecting shells and talking through the complex emotions the confrontation had unearthed. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that perhaps my father's rejection wasn't about my choices, but about his own insecurities. He spent his life believing education was the only path to respect, Tracy observed, as we watched the sunset. "Your success challenges his entire worldview. That's threatening." After Tracy returned to Chicago, Jessica called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "Did you really set up that scholarship fund for my kids?" "Yes," I admitted. "I wanted to help." Why? Her voice was tight with confusion. "We've barely spoken in years." "Because you're my sister," I said simply, "and family helps family." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken history. "Dad's still furious," she finally said. "But Mom, she's been looking into your company. She found articles about you online. And she's proud, Saul. Confused about why you kept it secret, but proud." It was a small crack in the wall of rejection, but I couldn't bring myself to hope too much. Tell her thank you. And Jessica, the scholarship continues regardless of what happens between us. The kids shouldn't suffer for adult disagreements. Despite my family's fractured response, I couldn't bring myself to cut them off financially. I established an anonymous trust with clear directives. My parents' medical expenses would always be covered. Jessica's children's education would be funded through college, and emergency assistance would be available without TAN. Question. "You're a better person than they deserve," Tracy said when I told her about the trust. Maybe I conceded. But I need to be someone I respect, regardless of whether they ever respect me. Business continued to thrive despite my physical absence from Chicago. Video conferences and late-night strategy sessions kept PayClear's momentum strong. We received 2 acquisition offers that month, one for $62 million from a major credit card processor, another for $58 million from a banking conglomerate. I declined both. The company was my creation, my vindication. I wasn't ready to surrender it, especially now when my identity felt so intimately entwined with its success. As days turned into weeks, Florida began to heal me. I established a routine morning swims in the ocean afternoons, working from my sun-drenched home office evenings, walking the beach as the sun set. I bought a paddleboard and learned to surf, finding unexpected joy in the physical challenge after years of intellectual pursuits. The isolation was broken by unexpected friendship. My neighbor to the north, Martha Collins, was a 78-year-old widow with sharp blue eyes and an even sharper wit. She appeared on my deck one morning with fresh key lime pie and unapologetic curiosity. 3 weeks you've been here, and not a single dinner party, she noted, setting the pie on my outdoor table. Either you're recovering from heartbreak or hiding from the law. Which is it? Her directness was refreshing after years of corporate diplomacy and family evasions. Over pie that morning, I found myself telling Martha everything: my childhood, the business, the disastrous family dinner. She said, when I finished tapping her fork thoughtfully against her plate. Sounds to me like your father has spent his entire life confusing education with intelligence and credentials with character. He believes in the system that worked for him. I defended, surprised to find myself taking my father's side. Martha's laugh was like wind chimes. Oh, honey, that system worked for him because it was designed for people like him. The truly brilliant ones are those who succeed despite the system, not because of it. Martha became an unexpected mentor during my Florida retreat. A retired psychology professor, she had the remarkable ability to help me see my family dynamics from new angles. Your father raised you with conditional love, she observed during one of our sunset conversations. His approval was always tied to meeting specific expectations. When you chose a different path, he experienced it as rejection of his values, not as you following your own. So what do I do now? I asked. Her answer was simple, but profound. Accept that you may never get the validation you crave from him. Find it in yourself instead. 3 weeks into my Florida stay, I realized Martha was right. The ache of my father's rejection had dulled from sharp pain to a muted soreness. I had spent years seeking approval that might never come. Perhaps it was time to fully embrace the life I had built with or without my family's blessing. That morning I sat on the beach watching the sunrise, feeling a newfound peace settling over me. Whatever happened with my family, I had created something valuable, helped countless small businesses thrive, and built relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. As I walked back toward my house, I spotted Martha on my deck, unusually animated, waving a folder of what appeared to be newspaper clippings. Saul, she called, you need to see this right away. Little did I know that those yellowed newspaper pages would rewrite my understanding of my past and future in ways I could never have imagined. Martha stood on my deck, clutching a manila folder, her typically composed demeanor replaced with barely contained excitement. I've been trying to place why you look so familiar since the day we met, she said, gesturing for me to sit beside her. It wasn't until I was going through some old papers last night that it hit me. She opened the folder and pulled out several newspaper clippings, some yellow with age. The headline on the topmost clipping made my heart skip. The reward now tops $91 million in search for missing tech pioneer and source code. I don't understand, I said, scanning the article about William Reeves, a software developer who had mysteriously disappeared in 1988, taking groundbreaking encryption source code with him. Martha pulled out another clipping, this one featuring a photograph. This is William, she said, pointing to a young man with a serious expression and familiar eyes. My eyes. The resemblance is uncanny, I admitted, feeling suddenly lightheaded. But what does this have to do with me? Martha's gaze was steady. I worked for William Reeves as his administrative assistant for 7 years before he disappeared. When I saw you on the beach that first day, something clicked, but I couldn't place it. It was driving me crazy until I found these old clippings. She hesitated, then added gently, Saul, when were you born? April 3rd, 1988. I replied automatically. William disappeared in February 1988, she said, letting the implication hang in the air between us. My mind raced to process what she was suggesting. That's impossible. My father is Walter Cooper, My mother is Helen Cooper. Is she? Martha asked softly. Have you ever done a DNA test? I hadn't, but the suggestion was enough to send me reeling. Could my whole identity be based on a lie? It seemed too far-fetched, like something from a television drama, not real life. And yet, certain puzzling aspects of my childhood suddenly came into sharper focus. My natural aptitude for coding, that had mystified even my teachers, my father's persistent resentment despite my achievements, the whispered arguments between my parents that would stop abruptly when I entered a room. This is a lot, I managed to say. Martha nodded sympathetically. I wouldn't have brought this to you if I wasn't certain of the connection. The timing, your innate technical abilities, your appearance, it's all consistent with you being William's son. That evening I made two decisions: to order a DNA test kit and to research everything I could find about William Reeves. The internet yielded a wealth of information. William had been a pioneering programmer who developed revolutionary encryption algorithms in the early days of the internet. His company, Secure Logic, had been on the verge of patenting technology that would have transformed online security when he vanished without a trace. The $91 million reward was for information leading to the recovery of his original source code and patent documentation, which had never been found. Most intriguingly, William had worked closely with a mathematics professor named Walter Cooper on early algorithm development. The two had filed preliminary patents together before William suddenly disappeared from the tech world and his apartment in Cleveland, less than 30 miles from my childhood home in Westlake. The DNA test arrived 2 days later. The wait for results felt interminable, but when they finally came, they confirmed Martha's suspicion. Walter Cooper was not my biological father. There's only one way to know for sure, Martha said when I shared the results. You need to confront your parents. The conversation with my mother was the hardest phone call I'd ever made. Mom, I said after awkward pleasantries, I need to ask you something, and I need the absolute truth. Is Walter my biological father? The silence that followed was answer enough, but her tearful confession still hit me like a physical blow. How did you find out? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. That's not important right now, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. I need to know everything, Mom. All of it. The story emerged in fragments between her sobs and my pointed questions. She had worked as an administrative assistant at the university, where both Walter and William taught. William, brilliant, charming, and unhappily married, had begun an affair with Helen that lasted several months. When I discovered I was pregnant, she explained, William was already having problems. His wife had hired a private investigator who found out about us. There were threats about his company, about patent ownership. Then suddenly, he was gone. And Walter, I prompted. He knew, she admitted. William was his colleague, his research partner. Walter had always had feelings for me. When William disappeared, Walter offered to marry me, to give the baby you a name and a home. But he resented me. I said, the realization washing over me with stunning clarity. He's always resented me because every time he looked at me, he saw the man who had the career he wanted, the woman he loved. He tried Saul, my mother, defended weakly. In his way, he tried to love you as his own. By constantly belittling my interests, by dismissing my achievements, that's not love, Mom. That's punishment. Armed with this new understanding, I called Martha, who had more revelations to share. William suspected someone was trying to steal his work, she explained. The week before he disappeared, he backed up everything to external drives and removed all traces from the company servers. He told me he'd hidden them somewhere safe, somewhere only the right person would find them. And no one ever did. No one ever did, she confirmed. But Saul. He used to say that true brilliance runs in bloodlines, that his son would follow in his footsteps. The implication was clear. William had hidden his life's work with the expectation that his child me would someday recover it. That night I dreamed of code sequences and hidden messages. I woke at 3 in the morning with a sudden certainty. The beach house, I whispered to the darkness. The property records confirmed my suspicion. The beach house I'd purchased in Sarasota had once belonged to William Reeves' family. I had bought it 3 years earlier through a realtor who had mentioned its previous owner was a tech executive, but I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Had some subconscious recognition drawn me to this specific property? With Martha's help, I began a systematic search of the house. We checked for false walls, loose floorboards, hidden safes, anything that might conceal decades-old computer drives. The breakthrough came on the third day when Martha remembered William's fascination with nautical navigation. He was always talking about longitude and latitude, she recalled. Said they were the original coordinate system better than any street address. This sparked an idea. I pulled up the exact GPS coordinates of the beach house and converted them to a numeric sequence. On a hunch, I entered this sequence into the electronic safe I'd never used hidden in the master bedroom closet. The safe swung open to reveal a metal box containing 3 external hard drives, ancient by today's standards, but carefully preserved, and a leather journal. He knew I whispered, holding the drives reverently. Somehow, he knew I'd find my way here. The journal contained William's personal accounts of his research, his relationship with my mother, and his fears about corporate espionage. The final entry, dated February 6, 1988, was addressed to his unborn child. If you're reading this, you've found your way back to the beginning. The work enclosed represents what should have been your inheritance. Use it wisely, and remember that true legacy isn't measured in dollars but in impact. With the help of data recovery specialists, we extracted the contents of the drives. They contained complete source code for encryption algorithms, decades ahead of their time-detailed patent applications, and evidence that William's business partner, not Walter, but a man named Gregory Steinman, had been selling company secrets to competitors. The $91 million reward was real. The patent applications, once verified, would be worth considerably more. But as I sat on my deck that evening, watching another Gulf sunset with Martha, I felt more conflicted than triumphant. I've spent my entire life trying to prove myself to a man who resented my very existence, I said, and now I discover my real father left me this legacy. It's too much to process. Martha placed her weathered hand over mine. What will you do now? I considered the question carefully. First, I need to confront Walter, not as the son seeking approval, but as a man demanding truth. 2 days later, I was on a flight back to Ohio, carrying copies of William's journal and a determination to finally understand the family dynamics that had shaped my life. I arrived at my parents' house unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, my rental car parked directly behind my father's meticulously maintained Buick. This time, I carried no gifts, no wine, no desperate need for approval, only truth and the strength to face it. Mom answered the door, her face registering shock, then fear. Saul, we weren't expecting you. I know. I stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation. Where's Walter? She flinched slightly at my use of his first name. In his study. Saul, please. If this is about the dinner. It's about much more than that, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Could you ask him to join us in the living room? There's something we all need to discuss. Walter entered the room with the defensive posture of a man preparing for battle, but his expression shifted to confusion when he saw the folders in my hands. What is this? He demanded. The truth, I replied, gesturing for them both to sit down. About William Reeves, about your partnership with him, about why you've resented me my entire life. The color drained from Walter's face. Beside him, my mother began to cry silently. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know I interrupted. What matters is that I deserve to hear the full story from both of you. For the next hour, the carefully constructed narrative of my childhood unraveled. Walter had indeed been William's academic partner, developing theoretical frameworks for encryption algorithms, while William handled the practical application and coding. They had founded Secure Logic together, with William as the technical genius and Walter as the business strategist. We were going to revolutionize internet security. Walter explained, his voice hollow with old grief. But William, he was reckless. Not just with the company, but with people's lives, including my mother's. Their affair had begun at a company Christmas party and continued in secret for months. When Helen discovered she was pregnant, William had already begun behaving erratically paranoid about corporate espionage. When he disappeared, everyone assumed he'd taken the intellectual property to sell to the highest bidder. Walter continued. The company collapsed. My reputation was ruined. All I had left was Helen and you. A constant reminder of your professional and personal failure, I said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Walter's shoulders slumped. For the first time in my memory, he looked truly old. I tried, Saul. God help me. I tried to love you as my own. But every time you showed that same brilliance with computers, that same intuitive understanding of code, it was like watching William all over again. So you pushed me away from technology, I realized, tried to force me onto a different path. I was wrong, Walter admitted, tears welling in his eyes. I've been wrong for 35 years. The admission so long awaited felt strangely hollow. I hadn't come for his apology, or even his acceptance. I had come for understanding, and that I now had. William didn't betray you, I said, opening one of the folders to reveal copies of the journal entries. He was protecting his work from Gregory Steinman, who was selling company secrets. The evidence is all here, along with the complete source code and patent applications. Walter took the papers with trembling hands. All this time, we thought. The reward for recovering these materials is $91 million, I continued. But the patents, once verified and updated, will be worth far more. My mother looked up sharply. What will you do with it? It was the question I'd been considering since discovering my biological father's legacy. The answer had come to me during the flight to Ohio. I'm establishing the William Reeves Foundation for Innovative Education, I explained. It will fund scholarships and resources for students with learning differences who show aptitude in technology, kids like me who don't fit neatly into traditional educational frameworks. I turned to Walter. I'd like you to serve on the board if you're willing. Your perspective as an educator would be valuable. The offer clearly stunned him. After everything. After how I treated you. Why would you want me involved? Because despite everything, you gave me a name, a home, and stability during my formative years, I said honestly. And because I'm tired of carrying resentment, it's time we all move forward. That meeting marked the beginning of a slow, sometimes painful healing process for our family. Jessica joined us later that afternoon, equally shocked by the revelations, but ultimately supportive of the foundation concept, especially its focus on alternative learning paths. I've seen so many brilliant kids in my practice who struggle in traditional classrooms, she acknowledged. Maybe if we'd understood your dyslexia better. We can't change the past, I said, but we can create a better future. Upon returning to Florida, I finalized arrangements with a patent attorney to claim William's intellectual property. Tracy flew down to help me process the emotional aftermath of the family confrontation. How do you feel? She asked, as we walked along the shoreline at sunset. Free, I realized. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. My relationship with Walter and Helen would never be simple, but it was evolving into something more authentic. They visited the beach house that Christmas, their first vacation in over a decade. Walter and I spent hours discussing the Foundation's mission, finding unexpected common ground in our shared belief in the transformative power of education, albeit through different approaches. Martha became an unofficial grandmother figure to me, and a surprising friend to my mother, the two women bonding over their shared connection to William and their love of gardening. Tracy and I got engaged on New Year's Eve watching fireworks from the deck of the beach house. Are you sure you want to marry into this complicated family situation? I teased as she admired the ring. I'm marrying you, not your family drama, she replied with her characteristic directness. Besides, I think we've proven that families can be redefined and rebuilt. PayClear continued to thrive, but with a new mission: integrated into its business model. We developed specialized payment processing solutions for educational institutions and nonprofits, charging minimal fees and redirecting a percentage of our profits to the William Reeves Foundation. The Foundation's first major initiative was a summer coding camp for dyslexic teenagers, hosted at a tech campus we built in my hometown of Westlake. Walter, now retired from teaching, volunteered as a mentor, finding new purpose in helping students who reminded him of the son he'd failed to understand. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. The boy who left home with $2,400 and a determination to prove his worth had become a man who understood that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or even family approval, but by impact and determination. Integrity. The journey from rejection to reconciliation taught me that success means nothing without peace. The $47 million company I built proved my professional capabilities, but forgiving my father, both fathers in their own ways, proved my humanity. Today, I divide my time between Chicago, where PayClear's headquarters remains, and the Florida beach house that mysteriously called me home. Tracy and I are expecting our first child in spring, a son we plan to name William Walter Cooper, honoring both the father who gave me life and the father who gave me a name. If there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that we don't need to be defined by others' expectations or limitations. True success comes from following your authentic path, even when that path is unmarked and uncertain. Family approval is a gift, not a requirement for building a meaningful life. The most powerful form of vindication isn't saying "I told you so," it's creating something so meaningful that past rejections lose their sting in the light of present purpose. What about you? Has your family ever misunderstood your dreams or choices? How did you handle that rejection? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey of overcoming family disapproval to find your own path resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of unconventional success, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' approval. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most painful rejections lead to our most authentic directions.